If you're a creative, the scariest thing you can be given is carte blanche. Having a blank slate is daunting and almost impossible to create in. Having parameters, and sometimes really strict parameters, can lead to the most creative of products. The mind suddenly wants to push the envelope. You'll want to find ways to go against the grain while still coloring inside the lines. Don't think outside the box. Recontextualize the box. 1965. One Gunpa Yokoi, fresh out of university with a degree in electronics, would start his career at a Nintendo toy factory as an electrician. By the end of the 70s, he would find himself running an entire research and development division as a toy maker and video game designer. All thanks to a luck of the draw visit from Nintendo's president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, early in his career. A serendipitous happenstance. Yokoi's hits included the Ultra Hand, the Love Tester, and the Game & Watch series. He'd be one of Nintendo's first arcade game designers when they entered the video game market. He was a trailblazer in this new industry of video games and would mentor one Shigeru Miyamoto as he worked on Donkey Kong. In 1981, Yokoi's team released the first Game & Watch handhelds. Other handheld games of the time used LEDs. The Game & Watches used a pre-printed liquid crystal display, the same technology used in calculators. This was widely available tech. Casio and Sharp were fiercely competing with each other in the calculator space, making supply plentiful and affordable. LCDs were cheap as butt, yo! It was successful. Game & Watch imitations would abound. From this, Yokoi coined a personal development philosophy: lateral thinking with withered technology. Nintendo, as a corporation, would also adopt this philosophy, which stands to this day. Withered technology is just old cheap tech, like the liquid crystal displays in calculators. The lateral thinking was a creative process in appropriating this old cheap hardware in a way not exactly thought of before to give it a second life, like using liquid crystal displays as the graphics for an electronic game. Don't think outside the box. Recontextualize the box. Yokoi would later apply lateral thinking with withered technology to Nintendo's first portable console, the Game Boy. Released in 1989, the Game Boy was not a powerhouse of tech. It had a whopping 4 shades of gray for color on a dot matrix display. Also, it wouldn't be backlit. Instead, the display would be an ugly puke green color to help with the contrast, making the 4 shades of gray actually 4 shades of puke green. Not all of Nintendo was on board. Some took to calling it the Lame Boy. While there was valid criticism of the hardware's limitations, Yokoi stuck to his guns. These limitations would translate into a long-lasting, affordable piece of gaming hardware. 10 hours of battery life and an $89.99 price point. It was a perfect blend of price and quality. It was a banger of a value. While the competition would have more advanced handheld consoles, they couldn't touch Nintendo on price and power consumption. It was a battery-eating monster that took 6 AA batteries for less than half of the playtime, and was almost twice the price. This was a game changer. The Game Boy crowned Nintendo as king of the handhelds, a throne that has yet to be usurped. This is, in fact, the console that would one day give us Pokemon. It's dogfighting the game! Flash forward to 1993. Link's Awakening is a Zelda franchise debut on portable hardware, and the first Zelda game to have a strong emphasis on story and character arcs. While Nintendo would still be a gameplay-first developer, storytelling was now becoming more important in the development process. This game is an interesting anomaly, as it not only has 1, but 2 faithful remakes. In 1998, a colorized version was made for the Game Boy Color, and it came with an extra bonus dungeon called the Color Dungeon, and support for the Game Boy printer. Then 21 years later, Link's Awakening would get a full polygonal remake for the Nintendo Switch, which is strangely accurate to the original source with minimal, and I mean minimal, changes to the core gameplay and mechanics. The main source of footage for this video will come from this version. Link's Awakening is a weird and wonderful ride. It further develops what the traditional Zelda experience would become. Ironically, it also breaks from the traditional Zelda story motif. It doesn't take place in Hyrule, Zelda is not in the game whatsoever, and characters from other Nintendo franchises make appearances throughout. Something Takashi Tezuka says if it were to happen today, he'd be mad, even though he's the one who originally did it. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is weird, yet it doesn't think outside the Zelda box. Rather, it recontextualizes what that Zelda box is. After the completion of A Link to the Past, Nintendo programmer Kazuyaki Morita had gotten his hands on a Game Boy development kit. Despite the Game Boy being a Nintendo product, his department only had one dev kit since his division wasn't actively developing Game Boy games. Morita was trying to get a Zelda-type game running on the Game Boy in his spare time, a piece of hardware with very limited capabilities compared to the Super Nintendo. Takahashi Tezuka took notice of this pet project of his. Another serendipitous happenstance in the company's history. He latched himself onto the idea, but the game was not an official Nintendo product. The two would work on this prototype after work hours. As it progressed, more people were brought into this after-school Zelda club. The team's imaginations were going wild. Ideas that were scrapped in The Link to the Past made a comeback. Tezuka had always wanted to be able to unequip the Master Sword and have Link carry two items at once, and potentially combine them, like bomb arrows. Hey, they did that like 15 years before Twilight Princess, I didn't know that! Miyamoto did not want the sword to ever be unequipped. The idea was scrapped in Link to the Past, but for this project, they went for it. This was an unsanctioned game, everything was in play, and anything was possible. As experimental mechanics were being played with, Kensuke Tanabe and Yoshiaki Koizumi were brought in to flesh out the scenario and story. For the scenario and characters, Tezuka wanted something that felt surreal and dreamy, like Twin Peaks, which he was a huge fan of at the time. Kensuke and Yoshiaki ran with it, creating a dreamlike setting with kooky characters. You may remember Yoshiaki Koizumi from my Mario series, taking over the reins as the main Mario producer from Miyamoto. Originally, Koizumi had dreams of becoming a filmmaker. However, he ended up at Nintendo in 1991 since he saw that games could be a new frontier for visual storytelling. One of his first gigs at Nintendo was writing and designing the Link to the Past manual. The story of the three goddesses and the Hylian creation myth is his doing. The kooky characters and character arcs and this cinematic intro to Link's Awakening, also all Koizumi. He handled the bulk of the story work, fleshing out the characters as real living people, with quirks, personalities, and full arcs. For the first time, story became an important component. Kensuke Tanabe was involved in scenario design for A Link to the Past. He had an idea that was put aside in that game that would fit perfectly into this surreal, dreamlike game. A giant egg that, when cracked, would usher in the end of the world. Is Kensuke on something? Is he okay? You okay there, Tanabe? With the traditional Zelda motifs ditched, a new setting was created for the game. A strange island with strange events and fun, crazy characters. As you'd progress through the game, it'd be revealed that Link was trapped in a world that is a dream of a supernatural creature called the Windfish, which is, let me check here. A mystical flying gypsy whale. Yeah, that sounds about right. By waking this mystical flying gypsy whale, the island and all its inhabitants would disappear forever. Strap yourselves in, cause things are about to get heavy. Link's Awakening begins with Link getting shipwrecked and stranded on an island called Koholint. As Link progresses in his journey, he discovers that the island isn't real, but a world dreamt up by this magical flying gypsy whale. And by waking him, or her, the island and all its inhabitants will disappear forever. The dungeon bosses in this game are referred not as bosses, but as nightmares, and That is the perfect name for them because 1, this is a dream world, and 2, one of the dungeon boss nightmares is a freaking clown genie. The further you get into the game, the more they'll tell you about their dastardly plans. They have kept the windfish asleep to keep the island in existence. Without the nightmares, the windfish will wake up and the world will end. They are simultaneously terrorizing the inhabitants of the island while also keeping them alive. Meaning, to save the island, you must destroy the island. This is kind of messed up, but it all is just a dream. It's not real. None of this is happening, right? So what's it matter? Let's get existential here. Have you ever had a dream that really resonated with you? You woke up the next morning still thinking about it and maybe still experiencing the emotions the dream elicited in you while you slept? How about this? Have you ever had your brain create a love interest in your dream? I don't mean dreaming about a crush, but a completely fabricated person from the recesses of your mind. She is not real, but she still felt genuine. It's a surreal feeling to wake up still in love with a person who has never existed. The people of Koholint have lives and personalities all to their own. There are families, dog owners, artists, musicians. There's even a love interest for Link. It's a world that to Link feels real. Marin is a young girl who finds Link washed ashore on the beach, and it's obvious she falls for him. And the player kind of reciprocates it on behalf of Link. She becomes the love interest. But she's not real, because 1, she's a fictional character in a video game, and 2, she's a dream, and not even a part of Link's dream, she's a part of someone else's that Link had somehow invaded. But the reality of the person's existence or lack thereof does not diminish the genuine love which can still be truly felt. When you wake up, you're still sad that you loved and then lost a person who never existed. The love was both real and not real, which begs the question, what does it mean to love if love can be real in a fabricated reality? I want to remind you, this is a video game originally from 1993 exploring existential ideas about love and existence, all on, let's see here, the Game Boy. This is the exact kind of thing a young, pretentious, early 20-something fresh out of film school would come up with. And that fits the description of Koizumi at this time to a T. But you know what? I'm here for it. This is on a note that I kind of resonate with. To save a life, to save your life, you have to destroy a world. Would you do it? Would you? What would you do? What would you do? The world is taken over by evil nightmare monsters, like a clown genie, but they're the ones keeping the world in existence. To save the world from their own nightmares, like a clown genie, also means erasing it from reality, a world you grow to love and adore. This can also be a metaphor for falling in love with the characters in a book or movie, or even this game itself. You're enjoying it so much you don't want it to end, but you also want to see how it ends. A catch-22. For a game from 1993, there is a surprising amount of depth. I'm like, geez, man, I just wanted to play some Game Boy. Let's get into something a little less heavy and a little more fun. A Link to the Past was a complete overhaul of the Zelda format compared to the original Zelda on the NES. Link's Awakening isn't a radical departure from what A Link to the Past established. Considering this game started as a direct port of A Link to the Past, this isn't surprising. At the same time though, it is a vastly different design approach compared to the SNES title. Dungeon puzzles and ideas aren't vastly different, they're just more refined. It's how the items are presented that is recontextualized. They aren't just the big secret item to be found in the big chest that may or may not be prudent to complete the dungeon. Instead, each item in each dungeon becomes a key in solving the dungeon. The Rock's Feather allows Link to jump over gaps. The Power Bracelet gives Link the ability to lift pots blocking his way. Oh no, the pottery. The Pegasus Boots allow Link to do a few different things. You can now go fast, just like in A Link to the Past. And you can knock things out of trees, because that's how I get things down from high places. I just ram the wall with my head. When combined with the sword, it can break through these special crystal blocks. When combined with the Rock Feather, Link can jump across larger gaps. Recontextualizations upon recontextualizations. Tezuka is really using his item combining idea here. The key items in most dungeons are also needed to defeat the boss/nightmare, and in some pretty creative ways, like Slime Eyes. You swipe with your sword and he starts to split, and then you use the dash from the Pegasus boots to rend him in two. Or Slime-eel. What's the deal with slime here? You use the hook shot to snatch him out of his cave so you can whack him with your sword. These recontextualizations don't just stop with the dungeon design, it's applied to the overworld as well. Now the game acts like a Metroidvania 1 year before Super Metroid would really define the structure of that formula. At the very start of the game, you can only explore the village and a small part of the beach, which is a hazard if you have no sword and no shield. But talk to Taryn in the house you woke up in and you'll get your shield. Now you can push these urchins and explore a little more of the beach at Taranobo Shores to get your sword. Once you have your sword, you can explore the mysterious forest and part of Koholett Prairie to get to the mushroom and the magic powder. With the magic powder, you can turn the raccoon back to Taryn, get the tail cavern key, and explore up to Gamponga Swamp if you want to. Once you get the Roc's Feather from the tail cave, you can now explore more of Koholett Prairie, Tabal Wasteland, the cemetery, and this area west of Gamponga Swamp. After getting the power bracelet from Bottle Grotto, you can lift these rocks to explore Ukuku Prairie, Canalit Castle, Taltal Heights, some of the western parts of Taltal Mountain Range, and parts of Martha's Bay. With the Pegasus boots, you can use the cave to cross the river and reach the Animal Village, Yarna Desert, and the ancient ruins. The flippers give you the ability to swim in Martha's Bay and explore the rest of the eastern Taltal Mountain Range. And finally, the hookshot opens up shortcuts across the map, unlocks the western part of Taltal Mountain Range, and access to the River Rapids ride. Not only do weapons open up more of the world, but they also create shortcuts. Before the power bracelet, you had to take this path completely around through the mysterious forest. With the power bracelet, you can lift these boulders and get there quicker. Items no longer just make you more powerful or more capable, but also aid in your traversal abilities. They aren't overhauled like they were in A Link to the Past. They're simply recontextualized, which is the basic theme of Link's Awakening's design philosophy, a phrase I've been mentioning over and over again. Tezuka called this game a Zelda parody, which is interesting because he was also the director for A Link to the Past, so he kind of made a parody of his own game. Because he viewed it as a parody, he felt more freedom to rethink what makes a Zelda game a Zelda game. He could recontextualize the Zelda tropes within themselves. So they took a lot of liberties in designing this game in both mechanics and, motif, I guess, which could have gotten them into some serious trouble. Another tangential aside, I want to take a moment to talk about brand and intellectual property rights. Characters from other Nintendo games make appearances in Link's Awakening. Mario, Luigi, a Yoshi doll, a picture of Princess Peach. They're all here. If this were to have happened today, Takahashi Tezuka admitted he would be mad, even though he himself did it 30 years ago. The reason he'd be mad, and I'm just spitballing here, is probably because he has a better understanding of brand. Let me explain brand. Brand is how a company relates to the consumer. Let's take Jif peanut butter. When I think of Jif, I think of peanut butter sandwiches and school lunches. I think of mom. Jif is family and childhood. Now let's think of Mario. When you think of Mario, you're thinking of a type of game you're going to get. The tone, the motif, the mechanics. You have a preconceived idea of what to expect from a Mario game. And that tone, motif, and mechanics are very different than what you'd expect from a Zelda game. This early on in each of the franchise's histories, you may not want to be mixing the two in this fashion. It could dilute the brand and cause brand confusion! Meaning you now don't know what makes Mario Mario or what makes Zelda Zelda. But their mentality at this time was, it's for the Game Boy, who cares? As if this game was lesser than because of that. Mario isn't the only character to appear. You have Wart from Super Mario 2, Richard from a Japanese-only game, The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls, Kirby from Kirby, and Dr. Wright from SimCity. This is where it gets interesting with intellectual property rights. Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong are IP owned by Nintendo. They aren't likely to let Sony or Microsoft use them for a game on their platforms. Kirby is currently jointly owned by Nintendo and HAL Laboratories. HAL is not owned by Nintendo. They are their own independent studio that acts as a second-party developer making games exclusively for Nintendo. In 1993, they owned Kirby. I don't believe Nintendo shared in any of those rights at that time, because Tezuka specifically mentions he doesn't remember getting permission to put Kirby in his game for the Game Boy. He did it because, who cares, it's just a Game Boy game. That's not how IP law works. Lawyers care. But I wouldn't consider that their greatest transgression. At least Kirby was considered an original Nintendo character. Dr. Wright, on the other hand, may be a bigger deal here. Dr. Wright is a Nintendo exclusive character from the SNES launch title SimCity. He was based off of a real person, SimCity game designer Will Wright, who would go on to make The Sims. Mr. Wright, how do you sleep at night?
On top of a pile of money with many beautiful ladies.
Dr. Wright is designed from Will Wright's likeness, except for the green hair, but everything else looks kinda spot on. And I assume they had permission in some form to use his likeness in SimCity, but I doubt there were official contracts written up for this cause it's video games in the 90s. Who cares? So by using his likeness again for a separate game on a different platform is legally dubious at best. By approaching this Zelda parody with the aloofness they did back in the early 90s, if done today, could have gotten them into some serious trouble. To once again quote Mikey Newman from FilmJoy, no one knows what they are doing. Despite the various liberties the team took with developing the game, they didn't really push the boundaries. Rather, they took the ideas from A Link to the Past and recontextualized what a Zelda game could truly be. Don't think outside the box, recontextualize the box. They didn't come up with brand new items or many new mechanics. The only original item was the Roc's Feather. On the surface, it looks and plays just like A Link to the Past, just a little weirder and kookier. They didn't think outside the box, instead they redefined what that box could be, by simultaneously remaining within the original defined parameters. There was an overworld, there were dungeons, and there were items that were all familiar to previous Zelda games. The use of the items wasn't even that radically different. They all acted similarly to A Link to the Past. They just recontextualized how they could be used. The overworld has similar variety to A Link to the Past. Forest, desert, swamp, water, temple, village. It's traversal that is recontextualized. Dungeons are similar in nature to A Link to the Past, but its locks and keys are no longer just literal locks and keys. But the items also act as a key to open obstacles that are in their own ways locks. Thank you Mark Brown at Game Maker's Toolkit for pointing that out. The box is the same box as before, but it's being used in a different way. With rethinking what the Zelda box could look like, they established what the Zelda box would become. Not only did this game set the standard for dungeon and item design and usage, it defined how the compass would work in future Zelda games. It established the trading sequence, finding and collecting items for upgrades, chicken flying, the song mechanic, fishing, mini-bosses, all established in this game because they recontextualized what a Zelda game is rather than trying to completely redefine it. In an interview on Iwata Asks, current Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma flat out admits that without Link's Awakening, Ocarina of Time would not have been the game that it is, which would define the look and feel for all 3D Zelda games. The fact that this game was done originally on the Game Boy is just amazing. Don't think outside the box. Recontextualize the box.